This is my video reflective video for contemporary practice transforming materials. We were asked in the assignment to start mind mapping and selecting and sorting previous work transforming materials, found, recycled objects. I did do some reflection on our traditional materials and so forth for the practice side of it. And I really didn't know where to start with transforming materials, because I do consider that in textile practice we are ongoing with transforming a material that we're either inspired by or we've discovered. So what I did in conjunction with the mind mapping and the research and sorting and selecting, I went back to found objects. Now I'd found and I'd carried out a little side project which didn't take me long to do. I found this fabric in the loft from a polytunnel. Now it was literally just a small side project to do some arm knitting, and there was quite a length of this fabric, or this material I should say, that was deconstructed, and I made this into a thread and did some arm knitting. Nothing special, nothing spectacular, but quite fun to do. Now that was the starting point for transforming materials. And luckily at work we were having a bit of a clear out, just preparing for our third lockdown in the COVID pandemic situation, and there was a box of coffee top lids. So, as they usually do at work, Neil, do you want any of this rubbish for your textile assignment? So I came home with a box of coffee top lids, and the starting point for it was I just sat there and I analysed the coffee top lid and thought, what could I do with this one object on its own? So it was a case of deconstructing to reconstruct to make a new found material. So going through various processes, various mind maps, various documentation, recording ideas, I deconstructed the coffee cup and reconstructed and started to discover I could actually start to form the idea of a fabric. Now this was a starting point which was later used in conjunction with some of the other newfound materials. Now moving on, I then started to discover what materials have I used in previous assignments that I could actually use and rediscover in this assignment. The reason why was because in the brief it did ask for something that would be innovative and quirky. So what I did was, in contemporary context, I used the idea of hair in my interior design project called Metamorphosis. Now, I only researched this area quite small, so I went back and pulled out that as an idea and then broke that subject matter down, and also using my own technical knowledge and skills, because I'm a hairdresser, started to think about the process of turning hair into a textile fabric. Textile traditional techniques came to mind: knitting, crochet, weave. Further investigations into the research of this material, there were real human hair, obviously, not as accessible as I thought it would be, because there are limitations with obviously working in hairdressers. You just have hair clippings, but there would be an alternative for this assignment to use real hair, hair extensions, and also synthetic hair that we use in avant-garde constructive hair ups and so forth for shows. So the process began. The first thing that I did engage, which I will pinpoint this now because I really did not like at all, was I'd also considered as a traditional material to transform would be that of horsehair. Now, I discovered this on the internet and bought upholstery horsehair. That came along and I bonded this with PVA glue. Not an easy material to work with at all, but hair isn't an easy material to work with, but this was just horrible. So the learning outcome in that was that horsehair it is workable with a lot of patience, but it was achieved with PVA glue, but I'd actually discovered that it is quite a strong reinforcing material. Hence, you know, I related this to wattle and daub in old architectural Tudor homes, where they would use it on the plastered walls as a strengthening bonding agent. So I didn't work with that as one of my outcomes. Now, what I did do to start off with real hair samples, I started to look at traditional materials, things like plaster of Paris, varnish, white paint, black matte paint. And literally what I did was I constructed the hair extensions, real hair, and just used a method of knotting, allowed the material just to work by itself, and I transformed this by placing this into plaster of Paris, and these are the results. It moves, it's quite strong, and it's rigid. I did not pursue this as an idea, but I do think that the outcomes are very successful. Moving on, the one area that I did feel that worked really well was that of synthetic hair. Now, synthetic hair comes in an array of colours, any colour palette that you choose. So obviously you do need to decide on a palette, but at this stage I didn't decide on a palette because I wanted to get a feel for the synthetic hair, what it would do, what it wouldn't do, how I could manipulate it. Using a combination of textile practices, weaving, knotting, sewing and so forth, I combined this with my hairdressing skills and came up with the idea of a hair fabric, but actually transform this and set this into PVA adhesive. Now this was really successful. Here you can just see that I've used pin curls. I poured the PVA over the hair into a tray and allowed this to set. With the plastic tray, it allows you just to peel off and reveals this flexible fabric is translucent. Straight away, this had a connotation of some research that I'd done previous with Iris van Herpen. So this was the route that I was going to consider for these samples. Now, moving on, when I started to play around with real hair, I used the same method with the PVA glue, and I, in actual fact, this material did present what it was going to do. Because I just laid it out, poured the PVA glue directly over, and once dry, peeled off, gave me a fabric, but these definitely had connotations of Iris van Herpen's work. So this was another consideration, which I did use for an inspiration. And as we can see, all of these samples are very successful. Now, the reason why these are not in a context is because I just really like the sample as they are, and I think I would want to put these to one side and really consider what I would do with them at a later date. Moving back to the synthetic hair, as this assignment progressed, I then started to get a feeling that the synthetic hair was working particularly well with the PVA. It was bonding, it was setting, it was sealing, and it was giving me the flexibility. Now, because I've wanted to create a hair fabric, I'd also wanted to make a crossover and bring back in a traditional practice of weaving. This worked particularly well with these samples because I was able to overlay in 2 layers with the hair, allow this to dry, and as we can see, the vibrant colour on this demonstrates the weaving technique, even though it's not actually woven, it's just a suggestion. And this worked really well. Refinement, sorting and development of this, then I was able to find a colour palette from semi-permanent fashion colours that we consider in hairdressing, and not necessarily a colour palette that I wanted to choose, but I just went with the flow because I was able to get this in considerable quantity, because with the idea of a hair fabric, I wanted to then consider scale. Now this, going back to the original synthetic hair sample, started to remind me of traditional materials, Harris tweed and tartan. When I translated this into my hair sample with a colour palette, this is what I achieved. It was flexible, square enough to adjoin to other samples and start to play with large scale. Now, again, I didn't really push, or I haven't made anything with these samples. I've just made suggestions. Now, I've made suggestions on my blog and I've made recorded videos. I put into practice what I learnt in my research, looking at other hairdressers, other connotations of hair and how that has been used in the world of avant-garde. Angelino Seminaro, Sally Brooks and Nija Nabino made hair hats, and these are the suggestions that I've made with my samples. Further to those investigations, I have then suggested interiors, could possibly be a cushion cover, a rug or a lamp, but I think as an assignment goes, I do really want to stop and consider where I will forward this assignment and sample, because I've generated a large scale piece of fabric. Ongoing in-depth research has led me to another artist called Matthew Barney. He is a sculptor and a contemporary artist and makes mythological movies, and there is one particular character within this movie that a tartan costume was created. Now specifically, the one thing that I did learn out of all of this was the connotation of colour in a Harris tweed tartan. And going back to Matthew Barney, his tartan was woven in red, blues and apricot colours to reflect blood, veins and skin of the human body for that particular character. Now these are investigations which I will consider for the future as an assignment, because I do think that the boundaries could really extend and could really be pushed, but at the moment I am very, very happy with the outcome of hair transforming materials with traditional application and using traditional materials. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you.